life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us for our show today. Bern, you know, in the community where we both live, I'll be driving around town and I like to listen to talk radio a lot. And it seems like every other day or every 2 or 3 days, some talk show host will program host will have a discussion about racism. Or it seems like almost any topic that's brought up becomes a matter of race. And it's very frustrating to me, and I think it's frustrating for a lot of people who listen to the programs and call into the programs. And I'm wondering why it's such a hot issue. It's been so many years since we seem to have been struggling with this problem. And this is certainly a country that is a multitude of nationalities, backgrounds, religions. It seems like there's got to be a better way for us to come together as a human community and resolve these differences.
You know, I didn't come this evening prepared to talk about this, but I've certainly thought about it, had experiences. My first exposure to racism in its purest sense was in Memphis, Tennessee. Had to have been 1948. I had joined the military and was stationed in Memphis, and it was near Christmas time. And as a young sailor, I was on Liberty in town, you know, living it up, drinking Coke, and, you know, I'd go back. Anyway, it was near Christmas, like I say, and I was struck by a image that I saw that night of a store window Santa Claus. It was a good Santa Claus, and all these kids were lined up and taking their turns sitting on his lap and telling him what they wanted for Christmas. And they were all white kids. And there was a black family outside, okay, watching this, and the little kids pressing their noses up against the window and appealing to their parents because they wanted to go in, and the folks trying to explain to them that they couldn't. And it's difficult for me to talk about this without getting a little emotional. Absolutely. I could not understand. Now, granted, I'd been brought up in the Northeast and had not been exposed to, you know, the Negro, the colored, you know, all the things that kind of circulated around that. But I knew one thing, that was a delightful couple. Those were sweet kids, and somehow that seemed terribly wrong. And you couple that with the signs that I saw about colored only, you know, this kind of thing with drinking fountains, and I was just amazed. And what I saw in the Navy, who was, by the way, was the first military service to desegregate. Yes. I don't know if a lot of people realize that or not, and this was back in, like I say, in the 47s. And those first few days in boot camp were volatile. We had Southern boys and black kids and people from the North and what have you. And I would say that probably for the first 8 or 10 days, I was pretty sure someone was going to get killed. I mean, there was fist fights, people pushed downstairs. I mean, it was terrible. However, it became apparent after a while that that was diminishing. And I look back on it now and I realize it's because the variables had been reduced. In other words, all of us had the same haircut, all of us wore the same uniform, slept in the same bunk, subject to the same orders, ate the same food, in the same, you know, chow hall. In other words, they had put us together, but had reduced the variables. Variables that did exist when they bused, for example, children to other schools. And those variables, they took with them their lack of income, you know, perhaps the clothes that they had on their back was not the same as they encountered in the new school. And so I think perhaps they were more aware of the differences. But I know that many of us became dear, long-lasting, even lifetime friends, even in spite of the differences, okay, in color. And I figured, hey, there has to be a way to do this because we do know this. We're not colorblind. A lot of people say we ought to get to the point where we're colorblind. That's never going to happen. We're going to be aware of the difference. But until we develop the psychic sieve, the consciousness of what this is really all about, there'll always be some difficulty, because that's natural. Now, I don't mean to be unkind, but it's natural to be uncomfortable with the difference.
Well, that's a question I've always had. Why is it that we are afraid of differences instead of embracing and reaching out to something different than we are? It seems like if you always are embracing sameness, that's what you get. There's no learning, there's no growth, there's no development, there's no expansion or excitement in sameness.
See, and that's good conscious logic thought, but it's from the conscious mind. And what we're contending with here, you'll remember from the past series, is the fact that in our brain we are trichotomous, okay? And that subconscious mind doesn't like difference. For example, just the other day, as a matter of fact, I was so glad that this came up now that I think about it. I read an article about Easter chicks. Okay, now, for example, they'll take eggs and they'll inject blue and pink ink into the unhatched egg, and the little chick will come out blue or pink.
You're kidding.
Yeah, now it'll affect the color of their down.
Is that permanent or temporary?
Well, that's the thing. I didn't know, hadn't even thought about it, but they said that those chicks will posture against one another and battle and peck and pick on one another just terribly until the down falls off and their real, like, duck feathers come in, and then they get along fine.
Because they're the same now.
Yeah. Even at that subliminal level, at the level of a chick, they notice the difference and they're prejudiced against the other. You know what I mean? And so, since we, in our subconscious mind, are filial, you remember filial? And the thalamus has a filial function. That's not very healthy on a socio-economic level. Okay.
It's an instinct.
Yeah.
A fight for survival type of a response.
And below that, you've got a reptilian mind, the hypothalamus. I mean, without any judgment at all, if it gets frightened, if it encounters something different or new, it's going to strike out. Okay? And because of this, there's going to be an eternal challenge. But I'm optimistic that as our conscious mind develops. Now, there was some time ago, I called a pathologist here in Sacramento, one of the leading pathologists in the world, and I asked him, if someone just hands you a brain, can you tell the difference, okay, between tall and short and thin and fat? He said, no, of course not. I mean, it was ridiculous. And what I really was getting to is, can you tell the difference between black and white and red and brown and yellow? And he said, no, there is no difference, okay? In other words, and this is who we are and who we're becoming. This protoplasm is a poor representation of us, okay? And yet we tend to make all of our judgments about the protoplasm that's limited in its design, primarily for perambulation, okay? Perambulation, that's to get the brain around, you know, to be able to turn around and look behind a door and walk through a door or cross a horizon. That's what this body is designed to do.
A vehicle, like a car, that our consciousness uses.
Or propagation. Okay, propagation. In other words, to create new brains. The body is designed to support that propagation process and to perpetuate the environment in which it lives. And that's all that this protoplasm does, regardless of how it's been affected by environment, evolution, whatever that is. Okay. Now, we make all of our judgments about this, however.
Isn't that true?
Yeah, and that is a subconscious function. And as we get conscious and realize that the truth of the matter is we're so much alike, and in the important part, which is the brain, as to who we really, really are, then maybe if we get mind conscious, we can see through the protoplasm. And another thing, man and woman. I mean, they've been trying to separate man and woman since the beginning of time, and the pathologist told me you really can't tell the difference in the brain. Now, you can in the function of the brain, but so far as looking at the membranous tissue and examining it and what have you, I mean, we're exactly alike. But it's that difference that we capitalize on or, you know, make our prejudice and our generalizations about. And that's as natural as breathing. And remember, however, that we're not necessarily subject to nature because we're supranatural. See, we have to hold on to this, that you and I and every person on the planet is a supranatural being. Now, that's not super, but supernatural. And supra means that we are above nature because we're cognitive. When you tell someone just do what comes naturally, you're going to have prejudice. okay, you're going to have inappropriate sexual behavior in order to propagate. And it's funny how we do this. Now, this may be switching over into another area, but the thing of it is, a female meets a male, okay, and juices flow, and they call it falling in love. They have sex and create a baby, and they call that a miracle. And I understand that, but we got to remember that a cockroach does exactly the same thing. In other words, you know what I mean? Because of the need to propagate. Mm-hmm. And so we get pretty confused about some of this. But the more conscious we become, the less difficulty that this is. Now, it's kind of like, as well-meaning as it is, and I applaud and I understand and I respect the various cultures' need to identify with their heritage and their background and to bring it right into the moment, if you would. But it's that very thing that will continue to cause problems. Okay? What I'm saying is that to celebrate your culture, have opportunities where you can exhibit it to your peers, okay? But at the same time, on a socio-economic level, find a way, a common denominator, to surrender and move to a common place. And then things begin to pop. That's what happened in the Navy. See, we surrendered our individual liberties and went to a common place with a common mission, and people became long-term, fast friends. As long as we perpetuate our differences, okay, then there's going to be this difficulty of generalization and prejudice. I know we have names for everything, and that's a generalization process, and it's a product of the subconscious mind in a fight mode. As it wants to be right, so it names those things that are different. And it's not just black and white, we know that. We know that, for example, in various shades of white there's difficulty. Mm-hmm. In various shades of black, in various shades of yellow, they prejudice one against the other in those areas. But understand it's a product of the subconscious mind, which is felinial and reptilian in nature, and to acknowledge that and to accommodate it and to celebrate it is ludicrous. I mean, we've got to get better than that. You know, one of the reasons we even have this show is to acknowledge and remind ourselves over and over again that we're 6,000 years old. 6,000 years old as a cognitive community, and still not very good at it because we really don't acknowledge and celebrate the mind and the way it's been set up. I don't know why, that's just the way it's been. And I know that in the last decade or two that we've been able to make a subtle difference in a lot of lives. Just the other day I was talking to a couple of fellows who I don't think had communicated with one another. They had been to 2 different seminars, and I was following up and saying, you have any questions or comments? And both of them said that they lived in a cesspool, okay, of agitation, upset, posturing, control orientation. And I'm sitting there listening to them, and I figured, gee, that must be tough. And yet I look back in my past, and I was there too. But I'm not anymore. And I was so grateful because most of the people, okay, in my life have been through Life Formula and Command Commission and Bottlenecks of Bereavement, and they've studied these things that we talk about here on the show, and they've kind of come to a common place. You know, there's a common denominator of understanding, and there's harmony and peace and communication. It's just not the same as what's happening to many of our viewers in their families, on the job. It's incredible. And there is a way through, and I think we're getting better and better as a society, but the fact remains that, see, here's the thing. A lot of people go, felinial, reptilian, what are you talking about? Well, let's look at what our bodies are supposed to do. Perambulate, that's to move around. Mm-hmm. Anything does it better than this, by the way, was created by the mind, like a wheel and a car and a bus and a ship and a plane and now a rocket that'll take us perhaps to Mars. But the thing of it is that's all called perambulation, propagation, and perpetuation. Does a reptile or a felinial, a cat or a snake, perambulate?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Do they propagate?
Yes.
And do they perpetuate in their environment?
So those are biological functions.
Yes. And the thing of it is, we've got to start becoming mind conscious, like I say, so when we meet someone, we're in awe rather than in judgment.
So you're saying that the natural suspicion or fear or separateness that people experience is a biological function?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm embarrassed to admit this. I don't like this, but I remember, now it's been probably 4 or 5 years ago. I was in Dallas, Texas one night, and I got out of my car, and I have a habit to leave my car unlocked. And I just kind of open about that stuff. And I kind of got out of the car, got some things out, and kept moving away from the car, and I noticed two black teenagers coming down, and they were kind of looking at me. And I felt fear, apprehension, anxiety, moved back to lock the car. And in doing that, was embarrassed, because they were delightful young people. You know what I mean? Good evening, sir, you know, and it was one of those kind of things, and they moved on, and I thought, you know, why do we have to be this way? And yet, you see, sometimes we slip. I don't care how conscientious we want to be, sometimes we slip into that fear mode that comes from being aware of a difference, okay? It could have been any number of things, and I might have reacted the same way, and at the same time have enough consciousness to say, wait a minute, I'm sorry. No, I didn't chase them down and apologize to them because they didn't know. I had to live with it myself, and I don't like admitting that. But it'd be trite for me to say that some of my best friends are black, but the fact of the matter is that some of my best friends and the ones that I communicate with indeed are black, and I have a real high regard for them. I'll tell you one thing, in the environment that I've existed in for years, a very volatile environment, for example, creative direct selling, and I chose that field because of its volatility as a liferatory. In other words, you bring people from the normal life that folks live out here and how they've been prepared or de-prepared, and you bring them into selling, and any shortcomings or weaknesses they have are going to come bubbling up like cream on milk. You know what I mean? In other words, the lack of ambition or a lack of initiative or anxiety about the public and whatever, it's going to show right away, okay? And so we can work on it quickly, or they run away and hide, okay? Very volatile environments. There was a peak period in my life some years ago when we had a national sales company, and I'm actually proud to be able to say that out of 5 years, we recruited about 17,000 people nationally. 17,000 people. And most of them had some college or were graduates. And you got 5 years involved. 2 of those years, the top salespeople in the company were women. And the other 3 years, the top salespeople were what? Were black. Okay? And we only recruited by circumstance, not by choice. Maybe one black person for every 10 or 15 people, and maybe one woman for every 20. In other words, how can you say that they're inept or inadequate or that different when they can excel in every environment they participate in? And we have to, and that's frightening to the unconditioned mind. You know, the fact that a person is different and they're doing as well or better is a little bit frightening. And don't think they don't know it and get a kick out of it. You know what I mean? In other words, there's no question. But racism is going to be here for a long time until we really catch up and become more intellectual.
Well, it occurred to me there are a lot of biological functions that when we are born, are not controlled by us.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there's so many things. We learn how to walk, we learn how to take care of ourselves, all these things. If it's a biological response, obviously we should be able to get to the point as a society where we teach our children.
Yes.
That's another function that you control.
I tell you, a lot of it doesn't kick in until we get outside of ourselves and become aware. Some years ago, I remember Randy, one of our 6 children, was coming home every day, and he had fallen in love. Now, Randy, I think, was in the 2nd grade. He was 7 years old, but he just loved Crystal. I mean, Crystal, he talked about her, how smart she was, how sweet she was, how nice she was, how she got along with the teachers and all the other classmates, and we couldn't hardly wait to meet Crystal, okay? And one day we had occasion to drop him off at school, and as he got out of the car, he goes, "Oh, there's Crystal. Hi, Crystal." And he ran toward her, and they walked into the school together. And I mean, I got a little weepy out of pride and gratitude, because Crystal was black. He had never mentioned that.
Wasn't important to
No,
him. Wasn't even relevant.
Didn't even give it a thought. Later, probably when he got to be around 12, he became more conscious of the difference. And I think there's some brain shifts, you know, when we get outside of ourselves and what have you, that we begin to get more conscious.
I think it's more a matter of what we hear, feedback from our society that's negative.
I think that
because I think if you look at little children, they seem to be much more apt to explore and to be curious about their environment, things that are different than themselves. And I think there's fear if they're taught to be afraid of differences, but I think there's curiosity, excitement, and enthusiasm if they're taught to be curious, excited, and enthusiastic about new things.
I think there's I was in agreement with that for a long time until you begin to realize that even on the lower liminal levels, okay, that there is a prejudice. Okay, so maybe it continues to be biological. It's just that we have the upper hand if we're intellectual. So in other words, it's going to be there, but we have the intellect. Are you familiar with the concept psychic sieves? I mean, have we talked about that before?
I don't know that we have.
I think we have to be aware that every sensory impact, okay, impulse. For example, if we see something, or smell something, or hear something, or feel something, that impulse goes straight through our system to the subconscious mind, because everything goes straight through. Now, whenever there's an impact, there is you have impulse, impact. When there's an impact, there is a splashing. Okay, like if you throw a pebble into a pond, there's going to be a reaction. Okay, what happens? The impact sends out, or the subconscious mind sends out electrochemicals into the conscious mind to be interpreted. Okay, if we have experience in a certain way, we develop what I call a cognitive sieve, so that we can psychically sift that experience and say, that's okay, that's not okay, this is new, this is fresh. All right? Now, in exposure, after a while, if that exposure is appropriate, then we develop a psychic sieve where we divorce ourselves from the differences. That's 100% okay. Unfortunately, if your exposure is unpleasant, okay, for example, if a black boy, young man, encounters a series of white boys who are abusive, he's going to be prejudiced.
Absolutely.
He's going to be afraid because that's his psychic sieve. On the other hand, if it's been a pleasant, emotional, satisfying experience, the psychic or the cognitive sieve will say, hey, this is okay.
Well,
and so it's a lot of it is experience, how it's interpreted, and then, of course, the education that comes into it.
Right.
Okay?
Well, if we weren't able to respond to negative experiences and learn from them, I mean, our chances of survival would be greatly diminished. We'd keep running out in traffic. But
we are getting better. I mean, we're getting better too slowly. There's no question, but we are getting better. There's no question in my mind there's parenting and nurturing and guiding going on in the American home and all over the world that never existed a decade or a generation ago. And I'm very optimistic about the next few years and some of the things that are occurring. We're just going to get a whole lot better at this. Racism, yeah, it's unfortunate. And I'm sympathetic with it, and yet we can't condone it.
Do you have any suggestions for families, for teaching their children or for helping their children to grow up and minimizing or eliminating these behaviors, or for cultures or societies?
Well, we're a product of the words that exist in our life, and so a lot of it is what parents say. For example, we did not say to Randy, you didn't tell us that Crystal was black. Because we remained
neutral.
Yeah, neutral about that. We didn't make an issue out of it, but we were inspired by our kid. That's what it boiled down to.
Well, if you would have even brought it to his attention, then he would have thought he had done something extraordinary, when that should be normal.
Exactly.
That should be the ordinary course of action.
I think a lot of it's communication, understanding, and I think, too, people taking some responsibility for their portion of the formula. There's no question that each of us, in other words, for example, as whites, we have to be aware of how we respond or react in the public place. And indeed, the black person has to take responsibility for how they conduct themselves in the public place so that we can begin to break through some of these things. I mean, I still get uncomfortable if a pair of breeches is worn down past the backside, whether it's black or white or yellow. See, it's not the color, it's the behavior that's upsetting. But there's a tendency, if we're not careful, to correlate the behavior with the color.
To generalize.
See, and that's what's inappropriate, and we can stop doing that just by continuing to talk about it and not excusing ourselves for it.
Well, and then you'd probably have a segment of the population that would say, well, what's wrong with me wearing my breeches however I want?
Oh, I know.
That's not an indicator of who I am inside.
Yeah, and yet it is.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's a statement. But you know what it is, and I understand this too, wearing the breeches down low, okay, or wearing
Will be
a
something
nose
different
ring.
in 10 years from now.
Yeah, or wearing a nose ring is a statement of independence. I'm free, I'll do what I want to do, and what they're doing is they're breaking away from a controlling environment that has been caused by parents being told they're responsible for their children rather than to them.
Which is a very interesting way to put it.
Big difference.
Absolutely.
And so if this kid's trying to pull away, so he feels he's being independent, but he conforms with his peers in order to disappear until he finds out who he is. A lot of that is about that.
He's still conforming with some segment of society.
Yeah, he's still conforming in order to hide out and disappear until you go, oh, okay, that's who I am. Because a lot of the kids who wear their bridges down below their bottoms someday will be in a three-piece suit. We know that.
We've all done that, probably to some degree or another.
That's right. Same thing with graffiti and what have you. I mean, that's a statement, I'm here. You know, pay attention to me. And usually people who have been paid a lot of attention to don't do that. You know what I mean? Because that part of their needs have been fulfilled. Pretty complex subject in a way.
Can you just take a minute and expand on being responsible to your children instead of for your children? I know we've covered this previously, but it's such an important concept and makes such a difference in our thinking and how we relate, I think, not only to our children, but perhaps to our partners, and other people in our life.
I'd certainly like to address it. Maybe we can squeeze it in. If I'm responsible for someone, I can be held accountable for anything they do. And therefore, I have to control them. You know, I've got to mold them and direct them so that they're just exactly the way I am, so that I can take credit or blame appropriately, okay? And so that person has their own agenda, so I'm trying to control, they're trying to break away, and so we violate our relationship. But if I'm responsible to them, okay, then I can nurture and guide and spend time and this type of thing, and then we can grow together. And there's a big difference in a family environment, in that semantical difference, and that's all that it is, as opposed to being responsible for, you're responsible to. Doesn't take any more time and energy, you get better results, okay, and and there is a difference.
I think that's certainly something that's important in management as well as in the family. I know that the boss that I work for now, when I started with the company, he said, if you fail, I fail. I only succeed if you succeed. And he was implying in that a commitment to my success, that we're on the team together, that he's going to do what it takes to help me meet our goals and to forge ahead. And I've seen that evident in a lot of the other management techniques that he uses, but it was, my jaw dropped when I heard him say that, because it's usually like, if you don't do this and this and this and this,
we're out of time.
You're out of here.
This has been the Life Talk. My name is Bern, and it's
Moses.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Bern.
Fit.